Welcome to a deep dive into one of aviation's biggest mysteries, the tragic crash of South African Airways Flight 295. You might know it as the Helderberg.
hmm
And you might be thinking, another plane crash. Like, what makes this one so special?
Yeah.
Well, even after years of investigation, like piecing together the wreckage and
Yeah.
recovering the cockpit voice recorder, from the depths of the ocean,
Yeah.
the exact cause of the fire that brought this Boeing 747 down in 1987 is still unknown.
What's so fascinating about this case is that we have so many pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
We know when and where it happened. We have recordings of the final moments from the black box. We even know, to a certain extent, what kind of cargo was on board.
Right.
And yet, the exact trigger, that initial spark that ignited this whole tragedy, it remains elusive.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's November 27th, 1987.
Mm-hmm.
Flight 295 takes off from Taipei
Yeah.
with a stopover planned in Mauritius before continuing on to Johannesburg.
Right.
On board, we have 140 passengers and crew, along with 6 pallets of cargo.
Good.
One important thing to note here is this wasn't your typical 747.
Okay.
It was a Combi model, meaning it was designed to carry both passengers and cargo on the main deck.
Mm-hmm.
And as we'll see, this detail becomes pretty significant later on.
You're absolutely right. That combi design is going to be key to understanding this whole thing, the chain of events that led to this disaster. But before we get to that,
Yeah.
let's trace the flight path.
Okay.
So everything seems normal until somewhere over the Indian Ocean, most likely during their descent towards Mauritius, a fire breaks out.
And from what I've read, things go downhill pretty fast, right?
That's an understatement.
Yeah.
The recovered cockpit voice recorder, the black box,
Right.
paints a terrifying picture of those final moments. You can actually hear the alarm bells.
Oh, wow.
The frantic scramble as the crew tries to manage the situation. The transcript shows them desperately flipping circuit breakers one after another, trying to regain control as systems start failing, but they're popping almost as fast as they can reset them.
Wow, that must have been absolutely chaotic. Can you imagine being on board, knowing something's terribly wrong, but not knowing what?
It's chilling, to say the least, and the communication with air traffic control becomes increasingly garbled. You can actually hear the stress in the pilot's voice as he's trying to relay what's happening.
I remember reading that at one point he even reports, we have a smoke problem.
Exactly. And that's one of the last coherent messages they manage to transmit. And shortly after that, all communication is lost. The plane, crippled by the fire and cascading system failures, breaks apart in midair, tragically killing everyone on board.
So, 159 lives lost, a plane reduced to debris scattered across the ocean floor. It's hard to fathom. It's understandable why investigators would immediately look into things like sabotage or terrorism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially given the political climate surrounding South Africa at the time. However, those initial fears were quickly ruled out. They found no evidence of explosives or any indication of foul play.
So if it wasn't terrorism, what were investigators left with? Was there anything suspicious about the cargo itself? Anything that could have easily caught fire?
Well, that's where things get interesting. A Taiwanese customs official actually conducted a surprise inspection of some of the cargo before takeoff and didn't find anything out of the ordinary.
Hmm.
And reports from South African Airways manager in Taiwan at the time described the flight crew as relaxed and ready for takeoff, though nothing seemed amiss, at least on the surface.
Okay, so no obvious red flags there, but this fire obviously started somewhere. So what did investigators find when they finally located the wreckage?
Well, the search and recovery effort was massive. It was a truly international undertaking. Imagine searching for the Titanic, but even deeper.
Oh, wow.
This wreckage was on the ocean floor, thousands of meters down. It took months of sonar scanning before they finally pinpointed the debris field.
Really?
They were using some of the most advanced technology available at the time.
So like finding a needle in a haystack at the bottom of the ocean. What did they manage to pull up?
Well, the most crucial piece they recovered was the cockpit voice recorder, which we've already touched on.
Right.
Sadly, the flight data recorder was never found.
Oh.
That's like a missing piece of the puzzle, adding another layer to this whole mystery.
Right.
But they did meticulously bring up pieces of the wreckage, painstakingly reconstructing sections of the plane to examine the damage.
It sounds like one giant 3D jigsaw puzzle, but with incredibly high stakes. And what did this forensic analysis tell them about the fire?
Well, the evidence strongly suggested that the fire originated in the front right cargo pallet. They found clear signs of extreme heat in that area, with some debris showing signs of temperatures exceeding 300 degrees Celsius.
Wow, that's incredibly hot. But what on earth could have been on that pallet to spark such a fierce fire?
Now, the official report, while incredibly thorough,
Yeah.
stops short of definitively naming the cause.
Okay.
But it does highlight a couple of interesting details. Remember the 6 pallets of cargo we talked about?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the ones suspected of being the fire's origin contained a mix of things, including computers
Huh?
and a significant amount of polystyrenic packaging.
Polystyrene, as in styrofoam. Isn't that super flammable?
Exactly. And this was back in the 1980s,
Why?
a time when lithium-ion batteries weren't as prevalent as they are today.
Right.
They weren't as rigorously tested either.
Right.
So naturally, investigators considered the possibility of those batteries spontaneously combusting.
That's a terrifying thought, a fire starting deep inside a cargo hold, completely out of reach.
Mm-hmm.
But you said the official report didn't definitively blame the batteries, so were there any other possible explanations they considered?
While the official investigation concluded it was likely an accidental fire,
Mm-hmm.
they couldn't pinpoint the exact cause. Now, what's particularly intriguing about this case is that later, after the end of apartheid in South Africa, there were calls to reopen the investigation.
Wait, really? Why? What else was being considered?
Well, some people believe there might be more to the story than the official report reveals. Rumors started circulating that maybe the cargo manifest wasn't entirely accurate.
Okay.
Whispers of possible military equipment or other sensitive materials being transported under the guise of everyday goods.
Okay, hold on. This just took a turn. So we're talking about a potential cover-up. Is there any actual evidence to support these claims?
It's important to note that these are just theories, speculations fueled by the lack of a definitive answer and the political context of the time.
Right.
No concrete evidence has ever surfaced to confirm them.
So it's like a mystery within a mystery. We might never know the full truth of what was on that plane. But even if we set aside those post-apartheid speculations for a moment, we still have the question of why this fire was so catastrophic. I mean, shouldn't there have been systems in place to contain a fire in the cargo hold?
You're absolutely right to ask that. And this is where that Combi design we mentioned earlier comes back into play. Because it turns out there was a critical design flaw that actually made the fire worse.
A design flaw? What do you mean?
Well, before the Helderberg crash, Boeing had conducted fire tests on their 747 Combi models, as you'd expect.
Right.
But here's the catch stage. Those tests didn't accurately reflect real-world conditions in a fully loaded cargo hold.
So the tests were flawed. How so?
Think about it. At the time, regulations only required them to test with a relatively small, contained fire. Imagine something like a single bale of tobacco leaves catching fire.
Okay, a controlled fire in a very controlled environment. But what happens when you have a rapidly spreading fire fueled by, say, stacks of electronics and tons of flammable packaging materials?
You're getting it. And that's exactly what those post-crash investigations revealed. They decided to recreate the conditions more realistically,
Yeah.
using materials similar to those found on Flight 295. Lots of plastics, polystyrene, things that burn hot and fast.
And hot pad.
The results were shocking, to say the least. The fire quickly grew out of control, generating intense heat and thick black smoke. Now, you have to remember that in a passenger plane, the air pressure in the cabin is supposed to be slightly higher than in the cargo hold.
Right.
This prevents fumes and smells from below from entering the passenger area.
Right, makes sense. So what went wrong?
Well, in this scenario, the intense heat from the fire completely reversed that pressure differential.
Wait, so instead of air flowing from the passenger cabin into the cargo hold, it was the other way around. Smoke and toxic fumes were being forced into the passenger area.
Precisely. And the fire suppression systems, which were designed for a much smaller, slower burning fire, were simply overwhelmed. It created a terrifyingly perfect storm.
That's horrifying. I mean, the passengers and crew wouldn't have stood a chance. It's unbelievable that this kind of design flaw could exist, especially on a Boeing 747.
It's a tragic reminder that even the most advanced technology can have unintended consequences. But the good news is that this tragedy did lead to significant changes in aviation regulations.
That's a silver lining, at least. So what changed?
Well, in 1993, the FAA introduced stricter regulations specifically addressing fire safety in what are called Class B cargo holds, the type used on the 747 Combi.
Hold on. Class B cargo holds. Could you back up and explain what that means for those of us who aren't pilots or aircraft engineers?
Of course. Basically, Class B cargo holds are those located below the passenger deck, designed for carrying a mix of cargo and baggage. The new regulations recognized that relying solely on manual firefighting in those holds was no longer sufficient.
So what do they do?
They implemented enhanced fire suppression systems, much more sensitive smoke detectors, and a greater emphasis on preventing fires from spreading in the first place. Essentially, they made it much harder for a fire in the cargo hold to pose a threat to the passengers and crew.
So in a way, the legacy of Flight 295, as tragic as it was, is one of improved safety for all air travelers, even though it came at a terrible cost.
That's a poignant way to put it. We may never know the exact cause of the fire, but the lessons learned from this disaster have undoubtedly made flying safer for countless people around the world. It forced the aviation industry to reevaluate its assumptions about fire safety and make the necessary changes to, hopefully, prevent a similar disaster from happening again.
You know, it really makes you think, what if that fire had started on a different type of plane, one with those more robust fire suppression systems? Could those 159 souls have been saved?
It's a question that haunts many who've studied this case, but it also highlights the constant need for improvement and innovation in aviation.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? Innovation, cost, and safety. And sometimes it takes a tragedy to expose those vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. The Helderberg disaster became a turning point in how we think about cargo compartment safety.
It's sad to think that so many lives had to be lost to bring about those changes. It really is. It's heavy stuff. But these are important conversations to have. It's incredible to think about the impact this single event had on the entire aviation industry. You know, it really underscores the importance of thorough investigation and not just accepting, like, the easy answers.
Yeah, totally. It's not just about the technical aspects either. This disaster had a profound human impact.
Right.
Think about the families of those lost on Flight 295.
Yeah.
They've had to live with the uncertainty surrounding the cause of the crash for decades. Can you imagine dealing with that? Not knowing exactly what happened to your loved ones?
It's heartbreaking. The pain and frustration they must have endured, especially with all these unanswered questions swirling around, I can't even begin to imagine.
And remember, as we discussed, the official investigation, while thorough, didn't satisfy everyone.
Right.
In the years following the crash, particularly after the end of apartheid in South Africa,
Right.
there were very public calls to reopen the investigation. It's as though the mystery itself became a source of pain, adding another layer of suffering for those who lost loved ones.
It makes sense, though, doesn't it, that people would search for answers, especially when the official explanation leaves room for doubt?
Absolutely. And that's what makes the Helderberg disaster so compelling, even after all these years. It serves as a stark reminder that sometimes, despite our best efforts, some mysteries may never be fully solved. We're left with pieces of the puzzle, maybe a few tantalizing clues, but no definitive picture.
It's a sobering thought. So where does that leave us? We have this tragedy, this enduring mystery, and these lingering questions about the cargo, the cause of the fire, and if anything could have been done to prevent it. What can we, as, people who rely on air travel, take away from all of this?
Well, I think the story of Flight 295 reminds us that continuous improvement is essential, not just in technology, but also in our understanding of risk, our unwavering commitment to safety. It's also a powerful reminder that accidents often happen at the intersection of multiple failures, both human and technological.
And that sometimes, even with the best intentions and the most advanced technology, there are forces beyond our control.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought, but an important one. In the face of such tragedy, it's encouraging to remember that the Helderberg disaster, while a terrible loss of life, ultimately led to positive changes in aviation safety, making flying safer for countless people around the world.
It did.
Yeah.
Hopefully, by continuing to learn from past mistakes and asking tough questions, we can prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future. It's a legacy that honors the memory of those lost on that fateful flight.
It really is. A legacy that serves as a constant reminder that every flight, every journey we take is built on a foundation of trust and the responsibility we all share to keep each other safe.
Well, folks, there you have it. The mystery of SAA Flight 295, a tragedy that continues to fascinate and remind us of the fragility of life and the importance of that relentless pursuit of safety. For those of you who want to delve deeper, we'll include links to resources about the Helderberg disaster and the history of the Boeing 747 Combi in the show notes. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds curious.